The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and welcome to another 1615 webinar. I'm Matthew Ellison, President at 1615 and also a Church Missions Coach. Before we get started with today's webinar, Short-Term Mission Trips, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I want to let you know about a few upcoming events and some resources that you might want to take advantage of. We love providing content to the body of Christ to further them in their Great Commission cause, and our next webinar is entitled Business as Mission, What It Is, Why It's Important for Our Generation. Larry Sharp of IBEC Ventures will be our subject matter expert. So if you're contemplating how to mobilize business professionals and entrepreneurs to be a part of reaching the nations, you'll definitely want to tune in and participate in this webinar and figure out how you can use business and entrepreneur opportunities to make disciples of all nations. And then we want to let you know again about a new resource 1615 launched last year. It's called the Mission Table. And we gather leading missions thinkers around the table and we tackle controversial and critical missions topics. Last year's episodes are archived and this year's episodes are rolling out one every month, the second Tuesday of every month. Please take advantage of that, a really great opportunity encouraging churches to think deep about missions. June, we'll be talking about Islam. How should Christians respond to radical Islam? Keith Swartley and a handful of others are going to be part of that discussion. So visit missiontable.org to take advantage of these great opportunities. So again, today's webinar is entitled Short-Term Mission Trips, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So let's be honest. There aren't just good short-term mission trips. There are also pretty bad and ugly ones. But what makes the difference? How do you even know whether it was good, bad, or ugly? This webinar will investigate good short-term mission trips and what makes the difference so you can proactively plan for an excellent short-term mission trip. Today's subject matter expert is Tori Ruick of Delta Ministries. He's a short-term missions coach and also the Chief Operations Officer. In just a moment, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Tori, but first, a couple of details for our live web audience. Your phones are muted to preserve sound quality. So you can listen through your computer speakers or you can call in on the telephone. As questions come to mind today, please type them in the question and answer panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be addressing questions for the last 20 minutes of our time together. This is your opportunity to join the conversation and talk to Tori. 72 people are registered for today's live webinar. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available for download at 1615.org in the next 2 weeks. Once again, that's 1615.org. I'm going to hand the controls over to Tori. Tori, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today and for sharing your expertise. Tori, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Matthew, and thanks for asking me to be here, and thanks to everybody who has joined us. My whole passion is excellence in short-term missions. From the time I was just in college and experienced short-term missions for the first time, ever since then I've realized that not every trip is the best, and we want each trip to be the best. So that's my passion is for excellence in short-term missions. So we've got just a little bit of time together today, and so I want to just kind of lay a roadmap for you. This is generally where we're going to go. Hopefully this will help inform you for your expectations. It'll help you kind of know what questions to ask. But generally this is what we want to do. We want to talk about how do we define success for a short-term mission trip? How do we communicate with others what makes a trip successful, or how do we even know what makes a trip successful? What I want you to be able to do by the time we're done with this is to be able to evaluate your own short-term mission trips from a multiple viewpoints so that you can determine success. And then, of course, in the end, we want you to be able to plan more effective short-term mission trips. And, of course, none of this is for our own glory or for our own organization, but for God's glory. So that's what we're going for. So let me try to just share this one story that illustrates the real challenge of defining success. Maybe you've never thought about this idea of defining success in short-term missions and why it would be difficult, but let me just share the story of Aggie Hurst. If you don't know who Aggie Hurst was, it actually begins with her parents. In 1921, her parents, David and Svea Flood, were Swedish missionaries, and they left with their 2-year-old son to go to the Belgian Congo, to a small village, but they were rebuffed by the chief, and so they were not allowed to enter the village for fear of alienating the local gods. Instead, what they ended up doing is they settled about half a mile up the slope and built their own mud hut, and they just simply prayed for a spiritual breakthrough, but nothing came. In fact, the only contact they had with villagers was a young boy who was allowed to sell them chickens and eggs twice a week. And Aggie's mother, Svea, decided that if this was the only African person from the tribe she could talk to, she would try to lead this one boy to the Lord. And in fact, God granted her success. But there were no other signs of conversions and no other encouragements. Then of all things, not long after that, Svea became pregnant and in the middle of the wilderness there, and when time came for her to give birth, a little girl was born who they named Ina, who would obviously become Aggie. The delivery, however, was exhausting, and Svea Flood died 17 days later. Inside David Flood, Aggie's father, something snapped. As he dug a grave and buried his 27-year-old wife and then took his children back down the mountain to the mission station, he gave the newborn daughter to the Ericsons, another missionary couple, and snarled, "I'm going back to Sweden. I've lost my life, and I obviously can't take care of this baby. God has ruined my life." With that, he headed for the port, rejecting not only his calling, but God himself. Within 8 months, both the Ericsons were stricken with a mysterious malady and died within days of each other. The baby Ina, was turned over to some American missionaries who adjusted her Swedish name to Aggie and eventually brought her back to the United States at the age of 3. The family loved the little girl and were afraid that if they tried to return to Africa, they'd have custody issues, and they decided to stay in their home country and switch from missionary work to pastoral ministry. And that's how Aggie grew up in South Dakota. As a young woman, she attended North Central Bible College in Minneapolis. There she met and married a young man named Dewey Hurst. Years passed, and the Hurst enjoyed a fruitful ministry. Aggie gave birth to a daughter and then a son, and in time, her husband became president of a Christian college in Seattle, and Aggie was intrigued to find a lot of Scandinavian heritage there. One day, a Swedish religious magazine appeared in her mailbox. She had no idea who had sent it, and of course, she couldn't read the words, but as she turned pages, all of a sudden, a photo stopped her cold. There in the primitive setting was a grave with a white cross, and on the cross were the words Svea Flood. Aggie jumped in her car and went straight for the college faculty member who she knew could translate the article. "What does this say?" she demanded, and the instructor summarized the story. It was about missionaries who had come to a small village long ago, the birth of a white baby, the death of a young mother, the one little African boy who had been led to Christ, and how after the whites had all left, the boy had grown up and finally persuaded the chief to let him build a school in the village. The article said that gradually he won all the students to Christ, even the chief had become a Christian, and today there were 600 Christian believers in that village, all because of the sacrifice of David and Svea Flood. For the Hurst 25th wedding anniversary, the college presented them with a gift of a vacation to Sweden, where Aggie sought to find her biological father. An old man now, David Flood had remarried, fathered 4 more children, and generally dissipated his life with alcohol. He had recently suffered a stroke, and still bitter, he had one rule in his family: never mention the name of God, because God took everything from me. After an emotional reunion with her half-brothers and half-sisters, Aggie brought up the subject of seeing her father. The others hesitated. "You can talk to him," they replied, "even though he's very ill, but you need to know that whenever he hears the name of God, he flies into rage." But Aggie was not deterred. She walked in, approached her 77-year-old father, lying on a rumpled bed, and said, "Papa?" He turned and began to cry. "I've never meant to give you away," he said. "It's all right, Papa," she replied. "God took care of me." The man instantly stiffened, and the tears stopped. God forgot all about us. Our lives have been like this because of him. He turned his face back to the wall. Aggie stroked his face and then continued undaunted. "Papa, I've got a little story to tell you, and it's a true one. You did not go to Africa in vain. Mama did not die in vain. The little boy you won to the Lord grew up to win the whole village to Jesus Christ. The one seed you planted just kept growing and growing. Today there are 600 African people serving the Lord because you were faithful to the call of God in your life. Papa, Jesus loves you. He has never hated you. The old man turned back to look into his daughter's eyes. His body relaxed and he began to talk, and by the end of the afternoon he had come back to the God he had resented for so many decades. Over the next few days, father and daughter enjoyed warm moments together, but Aggie soon had to return home. A few years later, the Hearsts were attending a high-level evangelism conference in London, England, when a report was given from the nation of Zaire, formerly known as the Belgian Congo. The superintendent of the national church, representing some 110,000 baptized believers, spoke eloquently on the gospel spread in his nation. Aggie could not help going to ask him afterwards if he had heard of David and Svea Flood. Yes, madam, the man replied in French, his words then being translated into English. It was Svea Flood who led me to Jesus Christ. I was the boy who brought food to your parents before you were born. In fact, to this day, your mother's grace and her memory are honored by us all. And that's kind of a long story, but I can't think of a better illustration of the difficulties of determining success, not just in God's kingdom, but specifically in cross-cultural mission work. Sometimes we put classifications on what's long-term, mid-term, and short-term, but I guess in comparison to an eternal God who lives outside of time, all of it is short-term. Certainly, you can see why David Flood would think his trip was a failure. Yet there was lots there that he didn't know that made it a success. And so one of the things that we see in that we learn from that is that in God's kingdom we can't measure success by the product, right? David Flood's product was family members who had died, a daughter he had to give away, and seemingly no conversions, maybe one. So in God's kingdom, especially in missions work, we have to really work hard to not measure success simply by the end product. It's just not a way to do it. We can't do it. Instead, we must measure it by the process. It would be easier for David Flood to see the success of his trip if he had seen the process that he went through and even was able to dwell in, though the loss of his wife was tragic beyond anything I can imagine. The process that even his wife lived was one that was a success. So let's look at that, thinking about the process. What process makes good short-term mission trips as opposed to bad or ugly? And I want to do this in a few ways, and that's to look at just a few case studies, because I want this to be real. You guys are in the real world. You're really communicating with missionaries. You're really planning this stuff. So let's look at it in context, and then we can try to pull that out into your context. And so the first case study here is, this is actually an email to a host that I was copied on one time. And let me just read it briefly for you. It says, "Hello everyone, trust you're doing well. Our team is excited and is busy equipping and preparing to come and see what God has planned. This year we have 8 missionaries, 5 women, 3 men ready to serve. We are close to purchasing our plane tickets and are planning on arriving July the 11th and be there through July 18th. We would like to spend the 12th and 13th visiting the orphanage and the remainder of the time serving the needs of the community. We look forward to doing a medical clinic, again using your local doctors and serving and nursing students. We will bring funds to pay the doctors and purchase medical supplies needed. This year we'd like to involve volunteers from the local church with some training while we do the clinic. Our thought is, since we are only able to come once per year, but medical is needed all year, that possibly in 6 months the community could put on their own medical clinic. If we could help with funding for the doctors and supplies. Please think about this and we can talk more once we arrive. I would also like to plant a thought in your minds. If we could take 2 people from each local church in the area and have a training day with the doctors, he could train the people to go back to their church and be the healthcare provider for their community. Doing simple wound care and treating minor aches and pains. Again, this would be something new, but would assist in providing some basic health care all year long." So I don't know if you guys can see on the right side of your screen. Hopefully you all have a chat box. I love chat boxes because it just gives people a chance to put in their ideas. At the bottom you might need to change it to say to all or to the whole audience, but you can hopefully do that. And I would love to see what you guys think about this email. What's good about this email, if you're able to access that chat box, we'll do that, and if I see stuff pop up, I'll address it. Otherwise, we'll go through this. So kind of two questions thinking about what's good about this email, but also what is bad about the email. Why would I bring this up? And perhaps you're wondering, man, what could even be wrong with this? I see nationals being trained. I see year-round ministry, even when the church is gone. When I got this email, I guess initially as well, my thought was along those lines. However, maybe you also have had the same impression I did, was while this looks like partnership, it's really one person telling somebody else how it's going to be. One of the first things, one of the most important things about the process of a short-term mission trip is, in fact, partnership and mutuality. So we need to talk about that. What is partnership? Partnership is, and I've got some marks here. I'm not going to pretend like I'm the expert on partnership, or that I'm a dictionary even, but here's the three parts, I think, that if you think about what this partnership looks like. The first thing is it's a complementary relationship. It's a complementary relationship. In other words, it's a two-way street. It's something that benefits both people. It's something that both groups contribute to, and they both get something out of it. If you were to think about your own short-term mission experience, even if I think about mine, to be honest, often it's a one-way road, right? It's me and my group, we come and we give and we serve, and if anything were to go my direction, I might say something like, they showed me so much love. And I don't want to minimize that. You know, that's a big deal. We learn a lot by seeing how other people love. Yet often, sometimes in such a short time, we really can't even make judgments on what was behind motivations of actions of people. Often I think short-term mission trips are a one-way street where a group comes down and does something for the host, and that's really where it ends. But we don't want it to end there. We want it to be a two-way road, a true complementary relationship. And so we'll talk about that in a second. But it's okay, though, if it's driven by a common purpose. In other words, there could be a vision between you and your host. And there's this common vision, and it's around this common purpose that that you both bring something to the table and you both receive something. So that's okay. So it's a complementary relationship driven by a common purpose, and it's sustained by willingness to grow and learn together in obedience to God. And I'm not sure that I could emphasize that last part enough. The partnership is really sustained by willingness to grow and learn together. I've often heard that there's three kind of levels of learning. One is that you learn about somebody. That would be like going to Wikipedia and learning about somebody. Learning from somebody, so maybe that person teaches you about a culture. And then learning with, and that's actually engaging with that person or that culture or that host and learning together as we go forward. And that's the deepest level right there. Any partnership, if it's going to last, there's going to need to be that desire for both partners to learn and a willingness to grow and learn together, not just learn from each other, but learn how's this going for you, learn what they're feeling, learn what they're sensing, what they think is the next step to take, and of course growing together in obedience to God. So that's what we mean by partnership. And I'm not going to lie, it's a lot easier for us to have something to bring and give. The real challenge is going to be how do you allow your host to bring something to the partnership and give to you. They might not be able to travel and come and visit your church and help you with ministry projects like you are able to do with them, but there's still something that they bring to that table. So to get into that, here's some thoughts on that. Some key questions for partnerships you can ask, and this hopefully will help you as you interact with that partner. One is, who are you and what do you hope to accomplish? And I think if I don't remember if there were handouts up on the website you guys can grab. If there are, these questions might already be written in. If they're not, hopefully you're scribbling them down. But who are you and what do you hope to accomplish? And that's what we're getting at, is what's the DNA of your church or your organization? What are you passionate about? How do you hope to impact this world for God's glory? Start there. You know, if you're like me, there are so many things that you would just love to be a part of. Your passion, your compassion will take you anywhere and everywhere, probably. And that, while that's a good thing, it can also be make it partnership difficult. So when we're looking at partnership, think about your own DNA as an organization or as a church, and what do you hope to accomplish? How do you want to impact this world for God's glory? The next question is, what do you have to contribute? You know, and what do you hope to gain? So let's not be falsely altruistic in the sense that, well, this isn't about us. No, it can't be primarily about us. Yet we'd all probably be pretty naive, and we'd probably even be missing a really big target if we were to deny the idea that we might have something to gain out of participating in God's plan for redemption around the world. So what do we have to contribute? That's not just financial resources, but what people has God put in your church or in your organization, and what skills do they have? But what do you have to contribute? What do you bring to the table? And of course, what do you hope to gain? How do you want to see people changed? How do you hope that this involvement changes your organization or your church? Another question to ask is, who is the potential partner? Who is the potential partner? What are, you know, is this somebody you can trust? Is this somebody you want to work with? Our organization was very involved in Haiti after the earthquake, and we got quite involved with one particular leader of a network of churches, and we made sure that this was somebody who was a visionary, who was able to put plans into action. One thing that we really wanted to see was important to us was make sure that if something were to happen to this one person, could the ministry continue? Or was he the owner of all of it? And what we found was that he was actually very strategic about bringing up leaders and putting people in charge of things and sharing that load. So make sure that potential partner is somebody perhaps who understands partnership, who understands he has something to give, or she has something to give, or they have something to give, and they aren't simply just takers. Another question to ask, and this might be something you ask your partner, is what does your partner have to offer, and what do they hope to gain? This might really help you determine what future ministry together looks like. So what does your partner have to offer, and what do they have to gain? And then finally, you can ask, what are we partnering together to do? And that'll kind of naturally flow out of these questions. What do we have to contribute? What do you have to contribute? What do we each want to gain? This will naturally come together. What are we partnering together to do or to accomplish? So that's partnership and mutuality. Every trip needs to start that way. Be very careful of planning a mission trip because somebody at your church said, I know a missionary here and we'd love to go do this. Or be careful of simply just responding to the most recent natural disaster, but enter it with real intentionality on partnership and mutuality, a mutual design of this trip as well as the whole partnership. Okay. So another area of thinking of your process. So we've already kind of discussed this idea of the approach, of partnering, of laying that foundation. This second case study is about a team of 12 college students that did a 3-week mission trip to Africa, and I want you to listen to this and see where things went wrong and maybe why, and we'll wrestle with what that means for us. So Julie and Kim were the leaders. Julia got married a bit before the trip, and her husband, Tim, came as well, though he was not in leadership. When the team arrived, they stayed in a half-finished building that was basically a concrete shell. The boys had a sleeping room, the girls had a room, and then Julie and her husband had a room. As it turned out, Julie was a very organized person, but not much of a people person. She and Tim would go back to their room whenever there was free time and didn't spend time hanging out with the team. On top of it, Tim had a very sarcastic humor that often cut people down and created unhealthy competition among people on the team. Eventually, the group began to feel rejected by Julie and Tim. Additionally, Julie shared leadership responsibility with her husband more than with Kim, which excluded her. The team eventually lost respect for Julie and Tim, and they lost respect for the team. So a question there is, in a sense, what went wrong? Maybe you jotted down some ideas, but what went wrong? Of course, some of this might be quite obvious. Clearly, perhaps the leader was not the right person to lead the group. Clearly, the leader was not aware of how her own interpersonal relationship with her husband would affect the interpersonal relationships with the team. Another thing that you might say went wrong was that there clearly must not have been proper training, by evidenced by the fact that Julie's husband was cutting people down. So as we think about the process of successful short-term mission teams, we have to also start with leadership and training. So we'll start with leadership first there. And there we go. The question there is, what is a leader? You know, we kind of have these different ideas, and we could spend a whole webinar on this leadership idea. But we all have different ideas about what is a leader, or what makes a leader, or what makes a leader good. And often the things that will come to mind are things like maybe they have an it factor. They just have that charisma. Maybe it's because they have the most experience. Maybe sometimes we default and make the person who speaks the language in the country we're going to a leader. But we want to really think, what is a leader? And as I struggle through that idea, and as I look at Scripture and consider especially the Apostle Paul, I come away really with the idea that the leader is the person who sets the example to be followed. In fact, the Apostle Paul will sometimes say that. They say, imitate me as I imitate Christ. That's a high calling. It's a huge statement. But the leader is often the person, or leader is the person who sets the example to be followed. Of course, one of the hard things that if you're in charge of picking leaders, of course, the hard thing is, then how do we know who's going to be a good leader? How do we get good leaders? And then, of course, how do we develop good leaders? Well, and I think what's inherent there is that good leaders aren't born, they're developed. And there are certainly certain skills or qualities that make leaders successful that you could be born with. But it's something that's developed, not something you're born with. So the character of a leader, if I'm simply observing and I say, I need more short-term mission leaders, what is the first thing I look at is the character. The first thing I look at is character. And so then what are characteristics of a leader? Well, let me just suggest a few. One of them, to me, would be a person of prayer. Does this person go to prayer as a first response to adversity, or is it a last response? Is this a person who people are comfortable coming to and saying, will you pray for me? Is this a person who actually does follow through and prays for people and with people? Another characteristic of a leader, I think, would be a person of God's Word. In other words, not only do they don't just walk around with the Bible all the time, but that they are legitimately reading and studying and devouring God's Word, and that it's actually transforming them, that you can see in their life a consistency between their values and God's values as communicated in Scripture. Do they have to have the whole Bible memorized? Of course not. But we want them to have internalized the values of the Bible and be able to know the Bible well enough that they can use it as a tool for comfort, or as a tool for even conviction, as a tool for ministry. So we want them to be a people of the Word. Another big one is a person of love. Is this a loving person? Is this a kind, compassionate person? Do they put people at least equal to tasks? Of course, all of us have different personality styles, but if you see somebody who consistently runs people over in order to accomplish a goal or accomplish a task, then we would question whether that person is going to make a good leader. A final one might be a person of service. Is this a person who humbly serves others, or is this a person who is trying to get others to serve them? So just a few small, I think, characteristics of a leader: a person of prayer, a person of the Word, a person of love, and a servant heart. So don't be confused, though, with the difference between the character of a leader and the skills of a leader. And I guess there are skills in leading. There is the skill of being able to organize and cast a vision and organize people into accomplishing that. So there are skills of a leader, and those will need to be built up. And again, the skills of a leader could be a whole nother webinar in and of themselves. But don't confuse character with skills. Character comes first, and then you can begin teaching the skills. And of course, some of those skills are going to be administrative skills, going to be cross-cultural communication skills. They're going to be training and teaching skills. And those are just a few to begin with. So on the training side, this is one of the big keys to a successful short-term mission trip. And that's one of the things we want to ask is how much and what kind of training, what to cover in training, and how to train teams. So let's just talk about that for a second. How much and what kind. So I've been a part of trips where the training consisted of 3 meetings where we people handed out information on what shots we needed to get, on our travel logistics, and on a packing list. And that was as much and the only kind of training we got. 3 meetings, all logistic-based. Obviously, by God's grace, we all made it and came back, and that I know of, we didn't create any major problems for the host, but that was probably not the best process for going on a short-term trip. So how much and what kind? Here's what I would recommend, and some of this is based on where your trip is going, the length of your trip, how intense is it. But to me, for a very common short-term mission trip, I think you need 6 to 8 meetings as a group, and I would always recommend some kind of training weekend. So the weekly meetings are great because they provide the time to get to know each other, the time to plan, the time to just consistently build relationship. And those could be once a week for 6 or 8 weeks prior, or they could be one a month for 6 or 8 months prior, although generally when that happens, as you get closer, you might meet every other week, or you might have a few more than once a month, just as the last-minute nature of preparing things is normal. But then I think you need some kind of training weekend. With Delta, what we do is we do it Friday evening and Saturday during the day. And what it does is it gives some extended time together to do things you just can't get done in an hour or hour and a half with a team. This could be activities, team-building activities that allow people to work together in a way similar to what they will on the field and get used to that. It could be a time for concerted prayer and listening to God. It just provides also a time for the group to come together in unity and to build momentum towards the trip. And often we try to do those about 3 to 6 weeks before the trip. So how much and what kind? I think you got to have at least 6 to 8 meetings plus a weekend meeting, maybe a weekend training. What to cover in training? There's a few basic things. We try to first make sure people are spiritually preparing for their short-term mission trip. And you could do that in a variety of ways. And again, all of these could be a webinar of their own. So I'm scratching the surface. You're going to have to dig some of this out. We want to make sure people are spiritually prepared. We want to make sure that their character is under construction, that God is molding and changing their character, and be sure that they are aware of how to demonstrate their character in a cross-cultural setting, in a culture that's not their own. We want to make sure that groups have a chance to get to know each other. And of course, we talked about that, the interpersonal relationships and conflict, because trips are an intense time. You're together nearly every second of every day, and often in close quarters. And the way that we treat each other is going to speak volumes to those who are watching. And then, of course, we also cover cultural information. In covering and training, you'll have to cover the logistics of passports and all is, of course, covering your ministry activity preparations. If you have dramas to learn, or skits to learn, or songs to learn, or studies to prepare, of course, that needs to happen. And then finally, the last thing there is how to train teams. And that's just an encouragement to be creative. You know, here's the one drawback of a webinar, of course, is for, 40 minutes I will talk at you, and then we'll have some question and answer time, which is probably going to be as valuable as any. So make sure you hang on for that question time. But as much as you can, as you train teams, try to limit how much of it is us just sitting in a circle and you talking at them. You can use things like guest speakers to come in. Maybe somebody from that culture will come in. You could plan a meal time that would be similar to your culture for that meeting. You can get creative in the way that you do things. Rather than lecture, have discussion, have a set of questions to work through in small groups, and then small groups share their answers. There's a whole bunch of ways to train teams that doesn't involve just sitting and you talking at them and hoping that they catch all of it. One of the things we want to do is give plenty of application and make sure that they have an experience, a chance to put into practice, to actually experience what it is that we're talking about and put into practice what they're learning. So that's a big one. Okay, so we've got, as we're thinking through a good process, we're thinking partnership and mutual design. We're thinking good leaders who have high character first, and then have the skills to lead second. We're thinking of training, again, saying we're going to focus first on character and spiritual development as we prepare for this, but not leaving out the skills that they're going to need to accomplish their ministry activities. Okay, then finally, let me move on to this last case study. If you can't read that, if it's too small, it says, ambition, the journey of 1,000 miles sometimes ends very, very badly. Of course, referring to the fish who swims upriver, perhaps thousands of miles, just to be eaten by a bear before it can lay its eggs. So let me share, these are out of order there, but let me share this last case study. It's a short one about a young lady named Stephanie who went to India for 8 weeks when she was in college. It was the most amazing experience of her life. She had grown up in a strong Christian family and had always gone to church. In fact, she truly loved Jesus. She returned from India and went through her senior year of college, but something always felt a little off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, and no one seemed to really notice. Excuse me. Eventually, she graduated and moved back home, where she got a job and continued with life. Stephanie never really found a church when she got back home, and eventually got used to not going. Sometime later, her old youth pastor caught up with her. As he asked her about life, he realized she no longer had a place for God in her life. She was very jaded and couldn't figure out what was happening to this young woman. who had gone to a Christian college and even gone on a life-changing short-term mission trip. So the question there that I would love you to be thinking about is what happened to this young lady? And maybe you've observed people like this before. What happened to this young lady? Well, I can tell you my thoughts. My thoughts is what happened was here was a young woman who went on a trip who, for the first time in her life, her experiences challenged her beliefs. Maybe that's happened to you, or maybe you've seen that happen. And let me just give one personal illustration that might help you understand what I'm saying here. The first time I ever left the country, I ever went on anything like a short-term mission trip was a 4-day trip to Ensenada, Mexico. And I remember at the end of the second day, writing in a journal that I didn't know what to make of the pastor of the church. He seemed so authentic. He seemed so faithful. He seemed so full of faith, in fact. Yet I struggled with the poverty, having never been outside the U.S. and having grown up, middle class America. I never experienced God outside of the four walls of my own church. And while I didn't realize it, I had this belief that righteousness equaled material blessing. Of course, I didn't grow up in anything near a health and wealth gospel church, but I'm sure you can imagine how somebody growing up in the U.S. would have this impression. I struggled because my experience of this pastor who is faithful, who is authentic, but very poor, did not match my beliefs. Chances are, with this young lady, she had a belief system that God is good and all-powerful, and if God is good and loving and all-powerful, the natural conclusion there is my experience of this broken world doesn't match, it doesn't fit. And so she had to reject one, either the experience or the belief, and she rejected the belief. That was her choice. So what we come to is that clearly with this young lady, nobody followed through with her. Nobody seemed to notice or ask questions. So we want to make sure that we're following through with each participant. And the goal isn't to turn each participant into a short-term missionary, but to make sure that each person becomes more like Christ. Okay, so that's just a small mindset shift. Again, we could do a whole webinar on follow-through. But let's get real practical. One is you can do, with the whole group, 3 meetings. Typically, this is what I do. One is simply a party, look at pictures, celebrate, talk about, just be together again. The next one is very aimed intentionally at looking back on the trip, reflecting back on what meaningful experiences, significant people, and what we learned. And then the third meeting would be geared towards taking that and moving forward. So what does this mean for me moving forward? But we can't do follow-through in a one-size-fits-all type thing. So I would encourage you as a leader to kind of group your people into one of 3 categories, either likely to never do this again, which is probably going to be your biggest category, somebody who will do this again and perhaps grow into leadership, and then the third category would be somebody who says, I think I want to become a missionary, or at least I want to go into full-time Christian service. Of course, the way that those people are going to go forward is different. What they're going to need is going to be different. You're not even going to be able to provide that for all of them, which is why I highly recommend mentors. A mentor is just simply somebody who will walk the road with them. Get the mentor before you leave. They can meet together for 3 or 4 months prior and commit to at least 6 months after the trip. So a good follow-through would be something important to a successful mission trip, to a good mission trip, not a bad or ugly one. So I do want to conclude kind of with this one I guess resource, and that's the Standards of Excellence in Short-Term Mission. If maybe you're already familiar with these, and maybe you already saw the pattern there. Whoops, went too far. Maybe you already saw the pattern there, that this idea of process over product isn't uniquely mine. The standards of excellence in short-term mission is simply 7 areas, and you can go to their website, soe.org, and look these up, and there'll be further explanation. But these are marks of what makes a successful short-term mission trip: God-centered, empowering partnerships, mutual design, comprehensive administration, qualified leadership, appropriate training, and thorough follow-through. If you've never heard of SOE, go look it up and learn more about these factors, these things. We really do want to focus in on our process, and then on the other side, when we evaluate, we're going to evaluate not based on the number of people who came to Christ, not based on the amount of work we got done in building, and maybe not even completely based on the impact it seemed to have on our team, but did we follow these things? Were we faithful in following this process? And then leave the results, leave the fruit up to God. So that's the end of the content there, and I think Matthew, I think, is going to take over and run that question and answer time. And I'd love to answer questions. If you have questions about how to do some of these things, we can do that.
Hey, thank you, Tori. A lot of great stuff there. Someone asked, will this recording be available? Absolutely. I just want to remind everyone that all of our webinars are recorded and they're archived at 1615.org. So just a reminder, you definitely can view this again, and I believe the PowerPoint will also be available. Tori, are you willing to share that PowerPoint?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you'll just let us know that you want that, there'll be a survey that you receive after this webinar. Let us know you want that, and we'll get you a copy of that, but again, it'll be recorded. So this is a great question. It comes from Sharon. And Tori, she wants to know why short-term missions. So not necessarily the what, which we covered today, not in detail, but some great stuff there, but why? Why should we even do short-term missions?
Wow, that's a whole nother webinar, but okay. So I'll make one assumption. I'm going to make the assumption that perhaps behind this question is there is an assumption that lifetime of service in a country is better than 3 weeks of service in a country. I'm assuming, maybe I'm being jaded, but I'm assuming that the question that's coming is, tell me, justify to me why this is worth it. So I'm going to turn the question and say, tell me why it's not. When I look at the Bible, Jesus was active in ministry for 3 years. Compared to a lifetime of service, is that not short? When I look at the Apostle Paul, was the Apostle Paul not a short-term missionary in the places that he went? Sometimes he was in a place a matter of days before he had to leave, sometimes 18 months. So I'm going to challenge the presupposition that perhaps is behind that question. If it's not, I apologize. But I'm going to challenge the presupposition that there's something inherently good about a lifetime as opposed to 2 or 3 weeks. So again, think about God and his eternal perspective. Isn't even a lifetime short to him? So I'll say this. Here's some advantages of short-term mission work. And I can even say this from the host side, as I was, I've never been permanently overseas, but spent the summer living with a Mexican pastor who hosted teams. The amount of enthusiasm that comes in from a group being there brings people into the church who aren't normally there every week. When you're on a short-term mission trip, you look around, you don't know who's new and who's not because you're not part of the community. But I guarantee you there's people there at that church service or at whatever else who aren't normally there, and they're because of you. Okay? The resources that you can bring, there's nothing wrong with groups bringing resources, financial resources, and helping out. It's honestly, it's a great way of, I think, sharing what God has given us. So the amount of resource that can come, and some people are going to say, well, but if you just sent the money instead of sending the group, you'd be able to send so much more. But let's be realistic. If people aren't going and traveling, that money isn't going. It's not getting there. So I love the passion, the desire they bring, the energy, the resources they bring. The whole reason for doing short-term missions can't be about the impact on the life of the person going, but that's also a legitimate thing, though, that it can be a very big discipleship moment in the person going. And let's look at our shrinking world. People are, I don't think it's even good to say, well, you need to stay where you are and just do this one thing. Why shouldn't people be able to go and experience and do and be a part of God's plan for redemption around the world? Acts 1:8 doesn't say be my witnesses in the ends of the world only if you're willing to do it for the rest of your lives. And I don't mean any of this to discount the impact of long-term missionaries, but there is value in what those teams bring and in that partnership.
Yeah, that's great. A friend of mine who I'm just honored to know, Robertson McQuilkin, he said, you know, there's a lot of bad rap about short-term missions, and some of it's deserved. But he says that it can be a catalyst to create a world Christian. And so there's a question that he says every short-termer should ask. What does this experience mean for my long-term involvement in missions? From the moment the trip starts, what does this experience mean for my long-term involvement? Again, not that the ultimate goal is that they become a missionary. That might happen, and that's great. But how do I integrate my life into God's larger picture? So I appreciate you sharing that. This is a great question from Andrew. He wants to know what would be a few examples of what the team/sending church can receive from their hosts. You talked about mutual design and mutual benefit. What are some examples of what that team-sending church can receive from the hosting partner? Yeah,
that's like I said, that's going to be the biggest challenge. Now, I have known of one or two partnerships where actually instead of raising money to send a team, raised money and brought a team from that country to help them with a mission, with a ministry project in their area. Of course, there's a lot of complications there, but that was one way. You know, that two-directionness, that's a tough one. I think part of it could be if you are involved in ministry activity that you as a church do. One of the ways you can integrate short-term mission into your greater church mission is by like a cause. It could be that people going and serving with this host, they're growing, they're learning from their host how better to be involved in this, because let's say you're involved in community health evangelism. You might very well learn from your host who is also trained in community health evangelism and understands how it works in his context. You might actually go and participate in that and learn better how to take that into the communities around your church where you're doing that sort of thing. So that would be one way, is that by going in with that intentionality of realizing this is something we're doing together, they're good at this. You found a partner who has seen fruit come of this ministry in their community, and you're actually going and learning from them. That would be one way.
That's great.
Yeah, I know we're short on time, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, that's a great input there. So this is from a good friend of mine, Tom Danielson. Tom, how are you, friend? He asks, how do you convince people to step out of a rapid-paced life to make time for trip prep and follow-up? So you got a bunch of people signing up, but you can't get them to come to training or debriefing. What do you do?
Yeah, that's good. So Tom, there's no real good answers to that other than as part of that registration or application process, it's already defined that this is what you're committing to, these meetings, and these follow-through meetings, and they're scheduled. Even the follow-through ones are scheduled before you go. And then it's going to come down to you as a leader holding people accountable to come to those. And honestly, being having grace, and of course some people, I had a flat tire or whatever, they can't make it, but being strong enough to say, you've missed all the meetings, we're getting ready to buy airfare, and I just don't see how you can go. That's not, it's not an easy thing I'm asking you to do, but I think if we set proper expectations and line that out from the beginning and then hold people accountable, then I think you will start to see people come out. And then honestly, part of it is we got to get better at planning training meetings that that are organized, that are interesting, that are concise, that aren't wasting our people's time. Because if we're wasting our people's time, they're not going to come. But if we aren't, if they're dynamic, if they're helpful, people are going to want to be there. If they come away going, oh, I feel refreshed having spent the last hour with my mission team, they're going to want to be there. It's not going to be hard to get them to make the time in their busy life.
I appreciate that comment, Tori. Yeah, a lot of times the reason we hate meetings is because they're so poor. But
Yeah.
If there is significant preparation and people are passionate about missions and the content's good, and like you said, there's some team building exercise, things like that, that people like, that was a fantastic meeting. So I think I want to reinforce that. Make sure it's an incredible experience for them, for the participants. And then if you do that, if you're really delivering solid, Christ-centered, heart-stirring content, then I think you have to make it a standard. And one of the things I would do, Tom, is I would appeal. Say we've done this before, and our experiences taught us that those who are prepared have the best experience. And truthfully, we just love missions too much. We love our hosts too much. We love our participants too much to allow them to go to the field ill-prepared. So I find an appeal really works, as opposed to, you got to jump through this hoop, you got to follow these standards. We know that's the case, but the experience is far too important to allow anyone to go to the field not ready for the cross-cultural challenges they're going to face. So just a thought there. Yeah. Okay, here we go, Tori, and we're going to end on this one. We could probably go for a long time. By the way, Tori is going to receive these questions, and hopefully he'll be able to address some of them and follow up with some of you. But how do you handle a team member with a hidden agenda that's disrespectful to leader and host? How do you handle conflict like this on the field? I guess that's a tough one to end with, but we will.
Yeah, okay. Man, so much of that is situationally based, right? So I can't tell you necessarily how to handle every situation, but let me back up a second. The best thing you can do to deal with that is to avoid it. The best way you can avoid it is through proper training, this is why we spend a significant number of hours in team building activities that require people to work together, that more often than not bring out that character trait, that hidden agenda, before we ever leave, and we can deal with it then. Everything from you need to grow in this area to you're not going to go. Okay, so that's the number one thing we can do, is get people working together, get people in a sense to expose those things before we leave. Now, once you're there and you realize they have the hidden agenda, they're disrespectful, I don't know what to tell you other than when it happens, just walk that, was it Matthew 16, Matthew 18, confront them one-on-one. You confront them with a couple other people from the group, and then maybe your whole group confronts them, and there's growing consequences. And if they need to go home, they need to go home. And that might be something that you need to have as part of your expectations from the beginning, is if you're, a code of conduct or something that says, in the end, if you're asked to go home, it's your financial responsibility, so that even from the beginning, there is a thought in their mind that if I'm not a part of this, that I'm going to go home. So ultimately, I think that's all you can do is walk through those steps.
Yeah, good word. I want to add something here. I know I'm going a little over here. Again, those of you who need to drop off, we understand. if you want to stay on, there's a few more things we want to talk about. But something we used to do, Tori, with our short-term teams going out of our church, once they had gone through training, so understand they're grasping the biblical basis for missions, they're bonding as a team, they're getting some cross-cultural training, all those pieces. And then before we would actually, launch out to the field, our leaders would gather that team together and say, God got us here. Money was provided, resources were given, and here we are on the edge of this opportunity. And then we would say to the group, what type of culture do we want on our team so that we're a blessing to our hosts, so that, we're a blessing to one another, and we would allow the group to actually speak into that.
Yeah.
What are the things that we want to shape our team environment? And then the leaders just shut up and just let this group say, well, we want this, we want this. And, after they've kind of put those things out there, one of the things our leaders would say, look, we're committed to experience happening. And so, we're not only going to hold you accountable, we encourage you guys to hold each other accountable so that we can get, all that God wants out of this trip for us. And what happened when we would do that is there was a pre-established agreement that we were going to challenge each other. And so when we would confront someone, it really became a matter of, hey, listen, there's some things I've seen, and man, it's veering us away from the reasons we said we came. Something like that's really powerful when you let the group kind of determine the culture that they want. So just a thought, and we would wait to the end after there was a team bond in place. And you talked about code of conduct. Really, they were making their own at that point. These are the convictions or passions, whatever you want to say, that are going to shape our experience. So just a thought there.
Yeah, we do a similar thing. And I think that the best place to do that is within like a team training weekend. That's something difficult to be done in an hour as part of this exercise.
Absolutely.
When you've had time together to bond and to share that. Yeah, that I agree 100%.
Absolutely. So Tori, mention the next mile here for those who are still online, and then maybe one more question you can answer in relation to this. Someone said, what 3 books do you recommend? Obviously, here's going to be one of them. So as you mention these, mention a couple others after this as well.
Yeah. So the Next Mile resource is going to be one of the most valuable resources for you as a leader. It's going to help you start to finish. So there's a leader's guide, a resource CD. With it are goer guides for your people, obviously a guide that they could give to their mentor. And then there's even post-field stuff. A milepost devotional, 52 self-paced devotions that they can go through. It helps deal specifically with issues typical with coming back from a short-term mission trip. Then the Next Mile e-zine, you can look it up. It's a series of emails you receive with resources. This is going to help you plan your meetings, plan your trainings, and all that stuff. This is a great one, a couple other books that I would recommend. Helping Without Hurting, and I forget the names of the co-authors, Fickert and somebody else, but I'm blanking. But along those same lines, it's a lesser known one, but there's one called by a guy named Jonathan Martin. He's a missions pastor up in Portland. I think it's called Giving Wisely, and it's similar, but I think actually more practical. So those are 2 of them. Let me give one more, and that's one of the best chapters. I think it's little more than a chapter. Is from a book called The Art of Coming Home by Craig Storty, and in it he has a chapter specific to missionaries coming home, and it's one of the best explanations of home and what makes home home and why that is a challenge when we come back from even a short-term mission trip. So those are some other resources.
Great. Again, just a reminder, we have some upcoming webinars, Business as Mission. If your church is mobilizing business professionals and entrepreneurs to be a part of your global work, you'll want to attend this. And then we hope you'll participate in the mission table, missiontable.org, challenging, critical, controversial topics that really are impacting missions today. So I'm going to leave this slide up here. It's got the information about Delta, their website. I believe you can connect with Tori through that. Is that right? There's a link to.
Oh yeah.
Tori, what is your email?
My email is toryr, so T-O-R-Y-R @deltaministries.com, and we have short-term mission coaches that would walk you through whatever process you're not comfortable with, whether it's training, helping you find resources, the follow-through stuff, we're there to support the local church.
Great. And I highly recommend Delta. They've got some incredible materials that really help a church leverage the short-term opportunity and make it part of a larger vision, not only for those who go, but for those who receive as well. Again, I'll leave this slide up. This is information about 1615. We do church missions coaching. We help churches develop a larger general church vision that really takes into account their uniqueness as a congregation. So if you're online today, if you're a churchman and you're thinking about moving from a supportive role to an active role and developing a focused strategic vision with the potential to mobilize your whole congregation, we'd love to walk alongside you as well. And that's 1615.org. I want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, will be available at 1615.org in the next 2 weeks. Thank you so much, Tori, for sharing your time and your wisdom today. I'm Matthew Ellison for 1615. Thank you for listening.